Wait, are we talking about railroads? Let's go to the thought bubble. In the 1870s, farmers formed the Grange movement to put pressure on state governments to establish fair railroad rates and warehouse charges. Railroads in particular tended to be pretty monopolistic. They owned the track going through town, after all, so it was hard for farmers to negotiate fair shipping prices. The Grange movement eventually became the Farmers' Alliance movement, which also pushed for economic cooperation to raise prices, but was split into northern and southern wings that could never really get it together. The biggest idea to come out of the Farmers' Alliance was the sub-treasury plan. Under this plan, farmers would store grain in government warehouses and get low-rate government loans to buy seed and equipment using the stored grain as collateral. This would allow farmers to bypass the banks, who increasingly came to be seen, along with the railroads, as the source of all the farmers' troubles. Eventually, these politically motivated farmers and their supporters grew into a political party, the People's Party, or Populists. In 1892, they held a convention in Omaha and put forth a remarkably reform-minded plan, particularly given that this was put forth in Omaha, which included the sub-treasury plan, which didn't exactly happen, although the deal farmers ended up with was probably better for them, government ownership of railroads, which sort of happened if you count Amtrak, graduated income tax, which did happen after the passage of the 16th Amendment, government control of the currency, which happened with the creation of the Federal Reserve System, recognition of the rights of laborers to form unions, which happened both at the state and federal level, and free coinage of silver to produce more money, which we'll get to in a second. The People's Party attempted to appeal to a broad coalition of producing classes, especially miners and industrial workers, and it was particularly successful with those groups in Colorado and Idaho. As the preamble to the party platform put it, corruption dominates the ballot box, the legislatures, the Congress, and touches even the ermine of the bench. From the same prolific womb of governmental injustice, we breed the two great classes, tramps and millionaires. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So some Western states were so populist they even granted women the right to vote in the 1890s, which added tremendously to the populists' electoral power. But most American voters stuck with the two main parties. Industrial workers never really joined in large numbers because the populist calls for free coinage of silver would lead to inflation, especially in food prices, and that would hurt urban laborers. But if it hadn't been for that threat of silver inflation, we might have three major political parties in the US today, or at least two different ones. Stupid inflation always ruining everything. Populist leaders also struggled to unify because racism. Some populist leaders, like Tom Watson, argued that black and white poor farmers were in the same boat, but Southern populists were not inclined to take up the fight against segregation, and even Watson himself later began spouting anti-Semitic rhetoric. But in the halcyon populist days of 1892, their presidential candidate, James Weaver, gained 1 million votes as a third-party candidate. He carried 5 western states and got 22 electoral votes, which is better than Mondale did. But the best-known populist candidate was actually the Democratic nominee for president in 1896, William Jennings Bryan. Bryan, who once spoke of America as being crucified on a cross of gold, firmly supported free coinage of silver in the hopes that increasing the amount of money in circulation would raise prices for farmers and make it easier for people to pay off their debts. William Jennings Bryan is probably better known for the anti-evolution stance he took in the famous Scopes monkey trial, where he was up against none other than Clarence Darrow. But he did almost become president. So the populists were really wary of Bryan as a Democrat because they feared that their ideas would be reduced to simply free silver. But they voted for him anyway. But Bryan still lost the 1896 election to William McKinley in what has become known as the first modern political campaign, because the business classes gave McKinley's campaign an unprecedented $10 million, which these days will buy you 9 ads in Iowa. But back then won you an entire presidential election. He won the Electoral College in a landslide, 271 to 176. Bryan's defeat in 1896 effectively put an end to the Populist Party. The corruption in government, both federal and local, continued, and new journalists called muckrakers began exposing it in the press. And even though they were defeated at the polls, populist ideas, especially direct election of senators and a progressive income tax, quickly became mainstream. Now these days we don't necessarily associate those ideas with populists, which suggests that maybe they were right to worry about hitching their wagon to Bryan's star. But in the end, would you rather have your name survive or see your ideas enacted? But of course, many of the problems the populists were concerned with persisted, as did the scourge of Jim Crow. We'll discuss those next week when we look at the progressive era. Thanks for watching.